And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Business Focus Live with me, John, where we talk about business related topics as well as news from here and around the world. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and let's get started. And we're back. Thank you again for joining me. So you may notice I've slightly started the live stream a bit earlier because I have a personal matter to attend to later today. So without further ado, let's get things started. So for our first big story that we're going to discuss today, so according to PC Gamer, well, Cyberpunk, for those who are game aficionados, the hyped up game which is Cyberpunk 2077 has been released recently, and it's got how should you say it? Some great news and some terrible news. So there's a good and bad side to when the game was released. And let's start first with the positive side. So Cyberpunk 2077 is the biggest PC launch in history. One can say that's true because it when it opened, it was the biggest launch in PC gaming history based on the open world project which it has, and it was able to surpass the bar which was set by World of Warcraft Shadowlands when it released the high bar of almost 4 million on the opening day. But compare that to Cyberpunk 27 or 2077, there are already a pre-ordered as much as 8 million people. Now, whether that's good or bad, obviously for the business, that's tremendous. But for those who bought it, especially for those console owners, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And obviously, a chunk of the success is based on their tremendous marketing. So you can just imagine the game was announced almost a decade ago, almost 8 years ago. I think even before the PS4 Pro was launched. So they've already mentioned that they're going to release a new game, which is Cyberpunk, and it shows the size of the audience that CD Projekt Red has built over the few years. Which obviously, for those who are familiar, they're known for the Witcher games, which is kind of tremendous. That's why when they mentioned that they're going to release a new game, everyone was looking forward, what the game would look like, how it would feel, and so forth. And obviously, you know, in terms of its experience, especially if you have a PC owner, especially with the high end, if you can afford the high end graphics card, it looks tremendous. And then if you have the latest console, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, you can just see the huge improvements over the current gen consoles here. And according to Cyberpunk, it's even tremendous that with the high, what do you call this, high pre-order has already garnered or has already recouped its development cost from way back, yeah, as I mentioned, 8 years ago. So Cyberpunk 2077 has likely already paid for itself. So it has already reached that milestone. The revenue from its digital pre-order sales alone exceeds all of its production cost and all the company's marketing and promotional cost. So you can just imagine anything after that, especially when you buy the physical games. If you can find one or if you can buy one and succeeding after that, they are all profit for the company here, which is it's a big success if you're in the within the company. And out of those 8 million that I just mentioned earlier, three-fourths of the pre-order were for digital copies of the game, which makes sense because people are still apprehensive going about it. It's more convenient, right, purchasing it to online, whether it be through Steam, if you're buying it for a PC, or through Play Store or Xbox Game Pass in Sony as well as in Microsoft. But there's a downside to it for pre-ordering it. And let's take a look here. So according to Steam, it has already crossed the $50 million mark over 2 weeks ago. So meaning from that point forward, it has already been receiving 80% of its royalties from that platform. Now, which lead us to today's main concern here. So it's not just all the positives that you will hear from Cyberpunk. So if you're one of the owners of those current consoles, a PS4 or a Xbox Series, not Series X, Xbox One, sorry, you may notice that you have a problematic experience, to say the least, meaning it crashes tremendously and the graphics doesn't look so well, look so nice, doesn't look anything to what they were showcasing way back almost 5 or 8 years ago. And how bad was it compared? They keep on calling it the last gen console, but there's a negative connotation about it. But technically, it's still a current gen console because the recent release of the Sony PlayStation 5 as well as the Xbox Series X is considered next gen, but it's only been in the market for I don't know how many months or a month or so. So majority of the gamers here are still using the current consoles, which is the PS4, PS4 Pro, the Xbox One, and so forth. So what's bad about it? Well, in terms of what do you call this? In terms of its performance, well, it looks terrible. So let's see here. Yeah, so if you were to look at it, CD Projekt Red has already publicly admitted that the last gen console versions, meaning the current one, has profound issues. The scale of the technical issues facing the old machines was underestimated, and the game was still released anyway. And they've already, provided a hot fix patch that they call it, so that it could provide better performance, improved performance, and they promise to do that again in the next 7 days. And then more substantial patch will be provided by next month and by January to February as well. And the big question here is, so why did they release the game if they knew that the game was not polished, not finished? So why the rush to push it? That they've been delayed. They were supposed to release it already early this April, but they had to push back and then push back. Then it's already Christmas, and then was it because pressure of the holidays? They need to they've already generated so much hype that their you know customers or gamers are looking forward to buying the game. But if you look at the flip side, yeah, consumers or gamers are looking forward to play the game. But if the game is not finished with all the bugs and issues, that technical issues that have been hampering the game, then maybe you should have delayed it, maybe a month or even 3 months, like the one they mentioned here, that they would be providing more patches. I don't think this would work if you were selling a different product altogether, not just a game. Let's say you're selling a mobile phone or a smartphone and you release it to the market with several technical issues. I don't think any consumer would be too happy to buy your product. That's which goes back to the first part of the story. Pre-ordering games is not it's not ideal for customers. You build up the hype, thinking that you're going to get a great game, but at the end of the day, it's faulty. And this is the worst case scenario. That's why I never buy, or for my personal experience, I never pre-order any game unless there's a review in terms of, let's say, if you're playing PC, in consoles, that, is it as intended for the game it is? Is it going to be an enjoyable experience? Instead of just focusing on the gameplay, which is, the game itself, if it's working properly, as mentioned in the PC review here, it's looked tremendous. The story, the graphics, the fidelity, all of those things, if it works properly, if it can cope up, it looks tremendous, and I think everyone should play the game. But for the rest who's not in the PC games, who are stuck in the consoles, you're stuck with this. So especially if you're playing with the current gen consoles here. And according to them, they have stated that after the delays that they mentioned, the management board were too focused on releasing the game. And now the question here is, did this happen by accident? That they didn't know that there were bugs, minor glitches in the game, that they still released it anyway. Similar to how, if you recall, Bethesda, when they released Fallout 77, that's another totally trash game that they knew ahead of time that it was not ready for consumption, for gameplay, and yet they still released it thinking that they would provide patches later on. Like, I think it only applies in the gaming industry here that they would release an unfinished game and expect people to shell out, 60 or even $70 or even more for the game, and thinking that people would not complain in terms of, I think it's an accepted practice in terms of the gaming industry, which I do not accept because as a customer, they already admitted that they want to rebuild the trust that we have lost. Well, trust takes a long time to build over time, and if you once you break it, it's very difficult to you know to get it back. Well, in my case, I made the right choice in terms of waiting off. If I want to play the game, see how it plays. If it doesn't work well, then I wait for some time, maybe a few months, even a year later, similar to how Microsoft did with their AAA game, which is Halo, right? They were supposed to release it in tandem with the release of the next gen console, which is which they didn't, because based on the review, it looks terrible. So releasing it a year later gives them ample time to improve the game itself. So you know was it the right strategy? Now comparing to how CD Projekt Red turned out, Microsoft did the right choice, or did the right statement and choice in terms of delaying the game, and that should have been the strategy that CD Projekt Red have implemented. And one of the main issues, as mentioned here, so let's take a closer look here. Where is it? There you go. So one of the main issues that the game was encountering was, actually before that. So the game is buggy to begin with. It crashes consistently, and it provides a terrible experience for gamers alike. And the question is, how was the game able to pass the certification from, whether from Sony as well as Microsoft? So obviously, it's not just Cyberpunk who was culpable here. Obviously, the publisher, the console makers, how are they able to allow such a big AAA game to be allowed in the market for consumers, which we'll talk about in terms of customers service in the back end. And state CDR Project Red stating that Microsoft and Sony is not responsible here, but I think everyone involved here, even the customers, are partially at fault here, because obviously everyone going in was trying to capitalize on the hype, the marketing that they built up so much. The customers are anticipating the game to be tremendous, and to everyone's surprise, the gamers were severely disappointed here. So another problem that mentioned here, as I mentioned, so as soon as you start the game at Night City, a lot of problems persisted here, and providing patches for future purposes, it only means that the game was not polished enough for gameplay here. And the developer does not even specifically address the performance issue here. So I won't go to the technical aspect, because there are a lot of buggy issues here in terms of ray tracing, the fidelity, the frames, the FPS. It looks worse than it is. So let's see here. So here they have an example here. So if you're playing in the Xbox One as well as in the PS4 Pro, so you can see here, ideally when you're playing games in those current consoles, you'd like it to be stable at 30 frames per second. But with the graphical demand for the game, which is Cyberpunk, it tends to fluctuate, which is it gives a not so smooth experience. So it can even be worse with the regular Xbox One as well as the regular PS4 here. So I don't plan on buying the game anytime soon, if and whenever. So it's not just that. So let's see here. Sorry. So what they plan, as I mentioned, is to provide a hot patch, so it could, provide a smoother experience here. And obviously, with the latest gen consoles like the Xbox Series X as well as the Sony PlayStation 5, you expect a higher frame rate, 60 frames per second, and better fidelity and graphical performance, right? Which is understood for a next gen console. But for a current gen, obviously there has to be a basic minimum standard of performance here, which I don't think CD Projekt Red has able to achieve that. That's why I think they've been delaying it for some time. And if you look at the many news outlet that has been discussing it for some time, and the way that CD Projekt tried to cover it up in terms of, obviously when before a game is released, they tend to give out game reviews for the different outlets to test it out, see what their review, if it's positive or negative, so consumers or gamers can have an uh, informed decision in terms of whether to purchase this game or pre-order this game in this case. And for the longest time, they've only been showcasing the PC aspect, not so much on the consoles here, which kind of surprising, and many was speculating there's a problem within the console's performance itself, which turned out to be true. And you're not expecting high performance compared to the next gen consoles, but at the very least, they should be running smoothly. Not high graphics fidelity and so forth, but a normal, I won't say normal, but a standard experience that you'll be able to play, from start to finish, not worry about if it's going to crash or it's going to be buggy. It looks terrible. It it stops you from immersing from the game itself. But the problem here is, from the very beginning, it does not work, and which leads us to the next part. So what did CDR Project Red state with all the fiasco that has been happening? They said that they're going to provide a refund for people who are not satisfied with the game, which is admirable. But I highly suspect it's more on the PR stunt that they're saying that they've they should have released it knowing that people would refund it. But obviously a lot of people have bought it already, which is good for the company. But for the gamers like me, you know I really didn't like it. And obviously in terms of the refund policy here, so let's see here, thinking that you'll be able to return it and get your money back. So in terms of Sony, not so easy, as well as in Microsoft. Even though or CDR Project Red has partnership with those two companies, but in the PC side, uh, if you download it on Steam, you are able to easily return it or refund it if there's a problem here. No questions asked. My question is, why can't Microsoft and Sony do the same thing here? Provide better policy or better service to your customers who are buying the game. The problem is the game itself is faulty, and they're not willing to refund it all together. So let's see here. So as I mentioned, so obviously this is dissatisfied players should return their copies according to CDR Project Red. So it means players are covered from both platforms uh, according to the standard refund policies. Well, Sony explicitly prohibits refund if you already started playing games, especially if it's a digital purchase, and unless the content is faulty, which is the whole point of this process. That for some it's a case to case basis, but for the majority, if it's faulty, they should be able to return it. Yeah, sorry. So as I mentioned, if you're a consumer here, why does the company, whether Sony or Microsoft, make it hard for customers to return the games if it's not their fault? It's the publisher's fault. Then I think the publisher should be the one shouldering the cost, whether it be the transaction cost and the plethora of back end costs that is associated with those processes, and should not be on the consumers who's paying the game to play the game, to enjoy the game here. And obviously with all the PR that they stating that anyone who has purchased the title according to uh, what's the name here for according to the vice president of business development, Michael Nowakowski. Yeah, Sony and Microsoft have refund policies for every product that is released digitally in their storefronts. But you know, refunding it is easier said than that, and according to them, anyone who has purchased any title on the PlayStation Network and Microsoft storefront can ask for a refund. Yeah, you can ask for it, but they not necessarily return the money that you have mentioned. And this is going to be a mixed bags of result, trying to request from Sony or even Microsoft here. Obviously, they're now focused on optimizing the performance for PC as well as current gen console here. Now, question is, what's the learning experience here? Obviously, for gamers, never pre-order a game, right? Especially the big game that is Cyberpunk here. You can imagine here how come previous games, years and decades past, that once they release a game, we're now focused on, is the game enjoyable? Should we play the game? Nowadays we're too focused on, should is the game is buggy, we'll wait for the several patch that's coming our way, and hopefully the game will improve. Similar how The Witcher 3 occurred. When they released it, it wasn't a great game that it was today. It took several improvements before gamers were able to enjoy the game it is. But based on their experience, they should have known, they have learned from that previous experience and not repeat history, with what they did today. And for me, it is what it is. Hopefully, for the future gamers who's going to buy future games, even though it's highly anticipated, like in the Halo example, if next year, if you think you really want to play the game, wait for the review to come out. And for the publisher, they should be upfront about it, that before the release, they should provide the game reviews to the different outlets, so that the appropriate reviewers can test it thoroughly. If the game runs smoothly, if it's just the game per se, let the gamers decide whether they want to purchase the game or not. And then if it has minor technical issues, then I think that's something that everyone can live with. But supposed to be, when you buy a game, it should be working 100% all the time, right? So that the business can generate the revenue that they want. Gamers can experience the game from start to finish without worrying, is it going to crash? It looks weird, doesn't, it breaks from the immersion that you're supposed to be doing in the first place, which is playing games. Anyway, that's enough ranting for that part. So next we have here. So speaking of Amazon, so many technologies that rely on, they need to be powered up using batteries here, whether in your mobile phone, your laptops, or any devices that needs to be powered up. Obviously, those batteries over time, if it degrades, you throw it away. Question is, what happens to that? What can we do to that? Obviously, with the surge of demand for electric vehicles, more batteries are being churned out, especially in the Tesla Gigafactory and in other companies as well. In the next 5 years, there's going to be a plethora or a significant number of waste, trash batteries. And what are we supposed to do about it? Obviously, the materials, the component that goes into it, they're not necessarily easily disposed of. So there's an opportunity here, which is a recycling startup company is preparing for a battery wave tsunami here. So as mentioned earlier, every smartphone and tablet has a battery inside it, and the lithium battery here comes from a very long process, from its raw material, from the South American salt flats, all the way to making it to a finished product, which is what you see in your devices here. So companies like Redwood Materials have started to what do you call this? Have started to recycle the waste materials from the battery itself. So obviously, it's a big daunting task. It's a big business, so that's why Amazon and Panasonic are starting this endeavor, so that it's a big industry that's going to flourish sometime in the very near future here. So let's see here. There you go. So as I mentioned, investors are betting on millions that a Nevada company, namely Redwood Materials, can mine electronic waste for metals. So a company like Li-Cycle aims to crack the logistical puzzle of transporting batteries. So they're developing the technology to rejuvenate dead batteries without breaking them fully. So by attacking the problem on all fronts, So transforming exhausted batteries into valuable resources. So meaning the goal here is to reuse those, as much as, if you could use majority of the dead batteries that you used before, I think that could be tremendous, and at least you don't just throw it away, and that's harmful for the environment here. And according to, I think there's an emergency outside. According to the industry's insider speaking, that the excitement and trepidation of a looming battery tsunami is going to happen soon. So you can just imagine, globally, people are already tossing out more than 500 tons. So that's 500 tons of lithium batteries today. According to AJ Kochar of Life Cycles, the co-founder. So I mean, there's an opportunity here if you can transform those waste into something reusable. So obviously, the transition to electric economy uh, has increased the appetite for more lithium-ion battery breaks here, and is projected to increase tenfold by 2030. So that's 10 years away. So obviously, with drive for more electric vehicles, more batteries, so there's an opportunity today. So the question is, how can you make it streamlined in terms of its logistic from uh, waste to recycled batteries for the consumers to utilize again. So obviously, they're building on the next generation of batteries from the materials of the last generation here. And take note, the recycling market for the lithium ion batteries is worth in the north of $18 billion annually by 2030, and it's up by from 1.5 billion from last year alone. So you could just imagine here. So Tesla co-founder is starting this recycling company, as mentioned, the Redwood Materials. So the co-founder of Tesla, JB Straubel, used his experience that he realized that there was no plan for processing cars at the end of their lifespan. So obviously there's an opportunity there. Instead of just throwing away the batteries, what can be done about it? And knowing that in the near future, in the next 5 years, there's going to be a surge of batteries in the market. If you can do something about it, convert that into a revenue stream for your business, and it's going to be tremendous. So you can just imagine, from 1.5 billion to almost 20 billion industry is going to be appetizing for any businesses who can do that. So another company that's planning to partner with a recycling company is the Amazon giant. So obviously they have the resources to do that. So the key here is the company uses proprietary processes involving a combination of burning batteries to melt the contents and submerge them in liquids that leach out the desired elements. So obviously, you're trying to segregate the different components, the atoms here, so that you can recreate another new product altogether. So the technique that they're doing here, which is proprietary, can recover as much as 95 to 98% of the battery, nickel, cobalt, aluminum, and graphite, and more than 80% of its lithium content. So much of those products are sold to the companies so that they can make new batteries altogether. So I think recycling is the best way, and hopefully we can keep our environment safe here. So the company is now trying to expand or increase its capacity. Obviously, there's going to be a higher demand in the future coming months, in years and decades to come here. So with better technology, hopefully, we can be more efficient in producing and recycling the batteries here. So that's something to look forward to. And obviously, the scaling up will be a major challenge for many businesses here, especially for startup. So obviously, you need to partner up with tech companies like Tesla, as well as Amazon's here, and maybe even Apple will go into here, or even Google and other companies alike here. So the key here is, as mentioned, how to collect, transport, sort, disassemble, process, and redistribute the billions of tons of materials that are coming is anything but simple. So it's going to have some high learning curve here. Hopefully, they can expedite the process so that everyone can benefit here. Hopefully, in decades time, that you can see in the streets that many are using battery powered vehicles, or many other devices that's going to be powered up by more batteries here. Continuing, so sad news for Honda, the car maker here. So there has been report, which has been reported according to cnet.com, that there's have been a recall of 1.4 million vehicles due to several issues, which is kind of alarming. Imagine that 1.4 million cars having to be recalled. If you're one of the owners of this model, which I'll discuss in a little bit, you are warned here. So for your safety, make sure to return those vehicles. And what are those problems? So is it critical? Yeah. If you think about it, because they could catch fire, which is could be deadly, could cause an accident, not just to yourself, but to other motorists here. So the 1.2 million, we were just talking about it in what do you call this? In previous live stream regarding the Kia recall. You have Tesla and other car manufacturers. What's going on with those car manufacturers? How come they're not thoroughly testing the different components that goes into a vehicle? Because obviously they spend a lot of R&D, research and development, in improving, making the processes, the vehicles more efficient, more fuel efficient, and so forth. But obviously the safety is another component here. And how come they're not able to detect this? Because is it because they're too focused on churning out more vehicles so they can sell to the market? Well, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Honda failed to recall several of their vehicles due to power window switches. So you might think power window problem is not an issue, but it could catch fire, electrical fires. So that's an issue. Then there's faulty body control modules and corroding drive shafts, which can fail and obviously can be catastrophic if you're driving when that happens. So let's see what are those particular models, so everyone can see. Let's see here. Yeah, so let's start off. So the first model that they mentioned, so that's between 2002 to 2006. That's the Honda CRV. So if you own one of those vehicles, or in this case the Honda CRV as I mentioned, the SUV has a feature of failing power window switches due to moisture entering the area. So if it rains a lot in your area, or if it does rain, if it accumulates moisture, the wires may dampen, which may melt or totally fail. And in worst case scenario, there's a chance of interior fire, which we don't want that to happen. Engine fire is one thing, but interior fire could be even deadly. Just imagine, like in an airplane, if it's enclosed and fire will suddenly burst, you have a few seconds to react, and if you can't react in time, that could be deadly, and could cost lives here. There has been there have been 23 reports of fires and incident. Thankfully, there hasn't been any fatalities here. So another mention here is the issue of the body control module, or the BCM, failure of some handful of cars, particularly the Accord and the Accord hybrid models here. So from 2018 and 2020, so the most recent purchases here for the past few years. So if you own one, you're warned. Another model that they mentioned here is the 2019-2020 Insight Honda model here. So the problem here is more on the BCM software problem, which can lead to a host of vehicle malfunction. So the windshield wipers that don't work can have broken defrosters. So especially if you're in the northern regions that has snow here, you're going to have a terrible experience here. Then you have inoperable rear view camera. So for other countries it's standard to have a rear view camera. For others it's not. So you can just imagine the convenience of having a rear view camera for reverse parking, to see any obstructions at the back when driving, for safety purposes. If it's not available, it could, accidents can happen. And then the exterior lights that won't flick on, which is, from personal experience, not having lights, especially at night, and when you try to turn on the switch and it's not working, it's kind of scary, because people at the back or at any point, aside or in front, can't see you, and it could cause damage or significant fatalities, and cause other motorists to be in an accident as well here. So it's not just that. Another model that they mentioned here is the Acura ILX and the ILX hybrid. That was released way back in 2013 to 2015. So it's a bit older, but You know, it has a plethora of issues as well. Another is the 2012 Civic Hybrid, which was really for the year of 2012. And then another model is the Honda Fit 27, 2007, 2008. These all have issues if you near somewhere near the sea where the road salts or other contaminants may corrode the drive shaft and cause them to fail. Again, you don't want to happen in the middle of the road when you're driving, and then if it corrodes, it could cause an accident or fatality at worst. So here are some of the states that have been mentioned here. So from Connecticut, Delaware, Washington, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. So if you're living in one of these states, you are warned. So return your Honda vehicle so that it can be properly vetted and checked for any fault here. And the question here is, why did Honda did not apply proper protective coating here? Were they trying to save on cost here? So at the expense of of safety for your consumers here. Now, whose fault is this? Is it decision making or was it by accident here? But either way, when you try to sell a product, especially that can cause harm or can be fatal if an accident were to happen, it's a big responsibility for those car manufacturers to ensure that the products that they sell, that consumers use in the market, is considered technically safe. Otherwise, why sell it in the first place, right? Well, hopefully no significant injuries or accidents can happen here. We'll wait and see what happens there. Next we have here is another common company. So it's not the same news, not related, but it's still in the car industry. So Hyundai is acquiring a company, Boston Dynamic. For those who are not familiar what Boston Dynamic is, they're known for creating the AI machine Spot the Dog. So it's an AI machine that can be tremendous in terms of expediting your process for doing mundane stuff or dangerous tasks in the workplace or in a working environment here. So let's see here. There you go. So as I mentioned, so Hyundai recently bought the American engineering company Boston Dynamics for Spot the Robot Dog venture for the amount of 921 million. That's almost $1 billion here. For acquiring them, we'll get them the automated, the AI technology, which is the Spot the Dog. So some may be wondering what's the connection. Why would Hyundai be buying Boston Dynamic here for the dog? It's not necessarily. It's for the technology, meaning the AI capability. Obviously, Hyundai, I'm assuming that they're trying to get into the driverless car, like how Tesla is doing, like other car companies are doing right now. So in order to do that, either they create their own division of AI technology, or they could acquire a different company, which is what they did here, which makes sense. So obviously, one of the largest South Korean car manufacturers and international tech companies made the massive purchase of the 28-year-old American robotics company, which is Boston Dynamics. So they have not revealed yet the reasoning for acquiring the company, but speculation is, based on their main business, which is making vehicles. So the main strength of Boston Dynamics is autonomous or AI. So if you meld the two, driverless car, so it's a match made in heaven if you think about it. So if you recall, Spot the Dog was initially sold for almost 75,000, and you could use it for a plethora, especially in a warehouse environment or an environment that's not safe for people to work through. So you could use Spot here, and the key here is the technology that lies within Spot here, and I think that's the main purpose of what Hyundai is targeting here. And as mentioned, the Korean manufacturing acquisition is intended for they call it the UMV, the Ultimate Mobility Vehicle development for working prototype in the coming years. So obviously, this will expedite their progression here, so that instead of taking decades, it could take years to be able to release or launch an effective product that can be used for public consumption here. And their goal here is the creation of the new vehicle that can transport humans and cargo, carry cargo. If you think about Spot here, it cannot carry anything here with aside from its own technical devices for its intended use. But if with Hyundai, obviously you plan to use it with their vehicles. If they can translate that technology into a vehicle, if it's self aware, you can imagine it could drive forward, backwards, park it, stay away from danger and so forth. That would be tremendous here. And I think Hyundai has made a tremendous bet on Boston Dynamics technology here to help them expedite the process here. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure many of us are looking forward to it as well. Anyways, for some local news here. So I think we were talking about this last week regarding the fiasco that is in the North Luzon Expressway debacle regarding the queue, the long lines, the ineptness of the company to be able to implement a cashless system. So what did the government, the Valenzuela City, the Mayor Gatchalian or Mayor Gatchalian, stop the operations in the sense that they cannot collect the tolls for the motors who's passing through. Obviously, whose fault is it? Is it just the company who's inefficient or not effective in implementing such, what do you call this, such strategies here to go cashless here? Or is it someone else? Well, according to the article here in Inquirer, it stated that the toll regulatory board is at fault here. Actually, according to Mr. Gatchalian, they wanted to be defunded or replaced altogether because of the ineptness to monitor and ensure that the smoothness of transition from one methodology to another. So the question here is, what is the role of the toll regulatory board? Obviously, their goal or their objective or their primary role is to ensure that whoever is who's in charge of the tolls, whether it's the North or South Expressway, should be able to run a smooth operation and not make it more cumbersome for motorists here, especially for businesses who has to pass through the thoroughfares or the highways here. And according to Mr. Gatchalian, he reiterated that removing the Toll Regulatory Board Executive Director for its ineptness, right, for not doing its job. And obviously, according to him, it's really frustrating, the sheer ineptness, and according to the mayor, has talked to several congressmen in the Luzon, Bulacan, obviously who are significantly affected of the traffic that is congesting in the North Expressway is very frustrating. And obviously, the mayor, Mr. Gatchalian, has to do drastic actions, which he did, was within his powers, and was able to coax up a reaction from the NLEX Corporation here. So let's see. There you go. So as mentioned, so it underscores the need for a regulator to actually regulate, the NLEX Corporation in this case, who can regulate or supervise the toll operators in the country. Otherwise, if you left them to themselves, they could take advantage, not take care of the consumers, and who's left to protect the interests of the citizens here? The government is the only one who can help us here. And according to Mr. Gatchalian, he stated that the executive director is not doing his job. Yeah? I think that's an obvious one. And this could have been avoided if he has been on his toes, according to him, monitoring and making sure that operators are performing up to the standard. Now, the key question here was, the government issued a statement on transitioning from a standard paying cash to a cashless method, which is admirable. But the question is, did they do enough research that stated that can they do it in a timely fashion within the weeks and months leading up to the actual implementation? They had to actually extend it, right? And obviously, if you're the one in charge of the supervision or regulating the toll operators, you should have asked them, can they do it in the timely fashion? Now, in other countries, it took years. So expecting us to do the same is, a tall task. And guess what happened here? So what was the reaction of the NLEX Corporation here? Well, they tried reopening the cash lanes here, which goes back to the objective of going cashless. So meaning either they're not capable of transitioning or not enough time was vetted. Is it the technology they're using are not enough, not effective, or they should use a different technology altogether? Is the RFID system the solution here? Maybe we need to use, as I suggested last time, similar how they use the technology in the LRT or MRT stations. They use a tap card so that when motorists pass through the lanes, they just tap the card, they pass by, and then they go through, then the next one and the next one. And it has to be 100% efficient operation here, not just using low grade technology, old technology that it's very ineffective here. And obviously, according to the NLEX, opening the cash lanes here, relocating the sticker is their only solution. Not looking if the strategies that they've implemented is the right one. And obviously, they should recommend it to the government, in this case, the Toll Regulatory Board, so that they could make a informed decision or recommend to the president whether transitioning to a cashless system is within the time frame allowable. Will it take months or even years to be able to implement it? Or is the technology that they're implementing sufficient? Is it the right one? Or if not, they should change it at the cost of the company, not the consumer, because obviously what they will do is try to pass the buck along, meaning how much whatever the cost is, the consumer would pay for it, which is not fair, and that's not how it should be if you're in the government, right? But hopefully they could iron things out and have a more enjoyable travels or for businesses to move along the expressways here in our country. Next we have here, so another update. So we were talking about the our bright senator suggesting for resumption of face-to-face classes because of the ineffectiveness of the distance learning. Well, there's a purpose for the distance learning in the first place, right? Because of the pandemic that is happening today. So obviously, in order to avoid contracting or spreading the virus, they implemented the implementation of distance learning is required, is important. Now, based on their recommendation, they're now Ched has now recommended to the president to implement the face-to-face classes as a pilot in low-risk areas. Now, whether that's the right decision or not, well, we still have to wait and see here. Anyway, so according to the article here in Rappler.com, so the president, Mr. Duterte, has already approved for it. So this will take place early next year for low-risk area, which is somewhat concerning here, if I were to be honest here. So the Department of Education, or DepEd, stated that the pilot implementation or dry run of face-to-face classes in select schools within areas of low COVID risk for the whole month of January. Now, I like the idea of having a pilot test, but wouldn't it be better if we were to prepare for it for the next school year rather than in the middle of a school year trying testing things if it would work or not? And obviously, testing it in low-risk areas won't make much sense because the pilot test should be implemented in high-risk area. If you cannot implement it in high-risk area, you're just only opening some schools. Some schools are not allowed to operate. Then why not just defer for it, until surely the goal that if it's for next year, for example, that why not prepare for the next coming school year? So you have the entire months, weeks and months to prepare. Let's say for the next school year, let's say come January, not January, come June, we have 6 months here. So what are the required steps so that we can ensure that when students go back to school, it's not just the school that has to be safe environment, but going to your from your house to the school, the travel time from your house to the school is the critical part. It's not just the school, right? So meaning the facilities, meaning the transportation system, people around you are aware, students, teenagers, kids are aware of the severity of the situation, so that proper protocols, maybe some marketing for children, that they should be wearing masks at all times. What are the proper protocols? The government could do some public service announcement and so forth. so that they have ample preparation. It's not just, we want everyone to be safe, right? Obviously, for the adults, we're all can decide for ourselves and we know what to do, what is necessary. But for kids, you just imagine kids running around, playing, forget wearing masks. And if they were to catch the virus, which hopefully that doesn't happen, that's a worst case scenario that we don't want it to happen here. And as mentioned, they mentioned that the pilots shall be done under strict and health safety protocol or measures. Okay, but there's always a limit, right? Question is, will the children follow it? It's one thing to implement it for the faculties, for the admins to do that. But how about for the children? The children is the key part here. If the kids don't follow what is stated here, then everything is smooth, right? So the commitment here is the responsibility for the DepEd, the local government, and the parents. But how can you task the parents here? The parents are working. So asking them to do more, if you can't ensure, the surrounding area where the children goes to or travel to, it's a difficult endeavor. So the question here is, the face-to-face classes will be only voluntary, which is great news on the part of the learner or the parents here. Where I think, on a safety standpoint, I think face-to-face will not be ideal for the foreseeable future, maybe until next school year, right? Until we can guarantee 100% that the safety of the children or the students who are going to schools are protected here. Now, obviously, the senators mentioned that they're urging the government to resume because they're not learning. Yeah, that's the downside of distance learning, because we're not ready, capable. So that's something they can look forward to in the future. But as of the moment, actually, a student group, namely the Samahan ng Progresibong Kabataan or SPARK, warned that resuming face-to-face classes in the middle of the pandemic is, dangerous, right? I won't say dangerous, but you want to contain it, and maybe resuming the face-to-face classes can increase the risk. So obviously, we have to ensure that the infrastructure, as I mentioned, the marketing, ensuring that the kids understand the given situation here, so that you can minimize rather than exacerbate the situation. And obviously, the testing, right? If we can even test the students here, who's going to shoulder it? The government. We already have limited budget for our operations here for the entire country. So meaning, can we afford to test every student here who gets sick here? Will the government foot the bill? Will the senators foot the bill if that were the case here? Right? Will you use your own pocket money here? Anyway, and according to the Department of Health, they stated that it supports the face-to-face classes in low-risk areas as where the pandemic is under control. Yeah, that's easy enough if it's controlled. But how about in the high-risk area? How are you going to mitigate that? Right? Again, it's unfair, right? You're going to test on an easy scenario. You have to test it on a more difficult area so that you can, easily implement it in lesser risk areas here. So it's a big daunting task. Hopefully, they'll make the right decisions and make it ensure that the safety of the children are at the top of their minds here. Anyway, for our last story here, just kind of not the last story. Still have one more. So here's an interesting story. So we were talking of the facilities that we need to what do you call this, to implement and ensure the safety of the children, right? In our previous topic, guess what? The Philippines has secured a loan from the Asian Development Bank in the big amount of $123 million. That's dollars, right? So that they can make a walkway along EDSA, right? Kind of disappointing. So the Asian Development Bank is funding the construction of an elevated walkway for pedestrians in EDSA. Is this really something that we really need with the immediate problems that we're having during a pandemic? Is a walkway really the priority? Should it be invested more, like I mentioned in the previous article regarding the health infrastructure, ensuring that the facilities in our public, offices and schools are safe and protected? Or, if you're going to build a project to help, commuters here, why not build more trains so that it could decongest the traffic which is along EDSA? Obviously there's already the project of subway being built. How about connecting farther cities in the northern and southern region from Bulacan to Batangas, Laguna, all of those, extend the network of our rail system so that more more people can have easily access to and from the province going to the city here. Anyway, so let's see here. There you go. Okay. So as I mentioned, the walkway is going to be a 5 kilometer walkway for each of the metro or metro rail transit line or the MRT 3. So that's in Balintawak. You have Cubao, Guadalupe, Taft Avenue, all stationed along in the 23 kilometer or 24 kilometer EDSA Toro highway that we have here. But is it really the best way to use the fund that is provided? And their goal here is to create a structure for each station so that it could create elevators and monitoring system for the elderly and pregnant women. Now, I'm all for the improvement so that it's more convenient for elderly and pregnant women, but should that have been implemented in the initial building of the MRT line itself, not after the fact? And should that be implemented in all train system if that's going to be the case? And which leads me to another point. Building stairways or elevators or even escalators is ideal, right? But for the majority, is it the majority of people who's going to benefit from it? Now, obviously, for the elderly, it's a small segment, and for the majority who's going to work, they're typically youngs in the 10s, in their 20s, 30s, or even their 40s that are using the main line as a means of transportation here. And their goal here is to encourage Filipinos to switch from private vehicles to public transport system. But again, how are you going to encourage that if you're just going to create a walkway? Not many people are living within EDSA there. So you need to connect the different cities, the different areas along Metro Manila here, from the north, the south, from the east to the west here. And I don't know, the walkway is the best way of taking advantage of the loan that you have just made here. You could put it in more advantageous ways for the for everyday citizens to enjoy and take advantage, make it easier for their traveling, or maybe invest in more train cars so that during peak hours along those train lines in the MRT1 or MRT3 or in the LRT1, so that there's not a long queue line. You could just imagine, especially during peak hours, the queue line goes from the platform itself all the way down to the street area. So shouldn't that be the first problem that should have been addressed, considering making aesthetic improvements in our areas here? Anyway, hopefully they could allocate some of those investment not to the pockets of those who they are. Anyway, and as mentioned here, the project is not expected to deliver results and convenience quickly. So again, it's going to cost more traffic along the main road, which is, imagining creating the MRT along EDSA was a horrible experience for many motorists, right? So you want to add more of that? Anyway, well, they said that the project construction is not going to have additional existing traffic woes along EDSA here. I will wait and see. Anyway, for our final story here, so some interesting story before we conclude. So if you're a struggling business here, what are you supposed to do here? So do you just simply pack up and leave? Do you give up? Or, is there's still a fighting chance? Well, according to one owner, Noe Potenciano, okay, who owns a restaurant in Boracay. So obviously, if you know that the Boracay is a travel destination for many tourists and local tourists as well, and they were closed for some time during the lockdown, and even though they have already reopened, but many people are still apprehensive traveling, or is it safe enough to travel with all the requirements if you want to travel from one city to another? It's not ideal. So the question is, what will happen to your business if you're not able to operate for a month, 3 months, 6 months, or even a year? For some, they close up shop. That's the easiest solution here. But for them, or for Mr. Potenciano here, he did something else. According to him, realizing that there's no hope, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So they had to do something else. So they decided right there and then to decide something else. So what they do was something interesting. And I think a lot of businesses could learn from this. So let's see here. So what they did was something else totally different. So what they did was bringing all their staff to the metro or Metro Manila, where they open up a pop up on all their of their all day breakfast place. So they created another business in the metro to sustain themselves for the meantime. So an example is the Sunnyside Cafe, Coconut Dessert Shop, Coco Mama, and a few more food delivery ideas. So what they did here is Noe and his wife Odette paid for their staff's ferry tickets, personal protective equipment or PPE, and swab tests. Now, obviously, this would entail more cost, but and also they also rented for them so that they'll be walking distance from the restaurants. Now, obviously, there's a initial upfront cost to do it, but obviously, even though it's expensive, it's a partnership with the owners and the employees here. What they stated is, it's reasonable, right? You build up the relationship here, and he stated that some of them have been with them for a long time, for as much as 14 years. So obviously, that's a relationship you just don't throw away that easily. So they built up the long-standing relationship. So with them, so it felt important to help them along the way. Now, obviously, during the height of the pandemic of the lockdown, the government only provided handout of as much as 8,000 for 2 months and received some, financial help from the potentianos, but obviously that's not going to be enough. So they have to be creative here. Obviously, if you want to continue having a business, you have to be creative. So in the case of Mr. Potenciano here, did something drastic, right, by changing location here. Obviously, what he longs for is to see people enjoy food again, not just buy food, takeout order, delivering online. Obviously, the reward is lost when this is just delivered to your doorstep here. It's always a different experience when you're dealing with servers, the owners themselves in the establishment themselves, right? And obviously, Noe has it tough, but at least his businesses is surviving in some aspects, while others are already completely shut down or have closed shop already here. Anyway, and obviously, good news for them. They're actually even busy now trying to cope up with the demands. Now, obviously, they're trying several things here. Whatever sticks, what works continues. If it doesn't work, look for another solution, change their approach here. Obviously, many businesses are in a desperate mode now, especially for small and medium enterprises here. So obviously, the government support is important here. And the question is it safe to go back so that consumers can support the many businesses that are out there? And if it's not safe, it'll be an uphill battle for many businesses here. And according to him, he wishes that the days ahead for the government to get their act together. And if you compare that to other nations who are already in their recovery period, uh, let's say in Vietnam, Thailand, they're on their way to recovery. How are they able to do that? Obviously by implementing, providing help or subsidies for the many businesses that are affected. It's not just the individuals you need to help, but the business itself. Because if you help the business recover, the economy will recover on its own. How fast will always be up to the government here. And according to Mr. Potenciano, a big bold intervention is necessary, which is true, right? Little adjustments won't do it or won't cut it anymore. So hopefully for next year they have something planned to encourage businesses to survive and encourage new businesses to start up. Obviously, when there's a problem, there's always an opportunity to start a business to generate more revenue. Either you adapt or you fade away. Anyway, I think that's it for today. So thank you again for joining me. So just an update for next week. Next week will be Christmas Day, so there will be no live stream there, but we will resume come New Year's Day here. So and then it will be an interesting live stream. So we'll do a recap of the year in review in a sense. So look forward to doing that. So again, if you have any question with the topics that was discussed today, I'll leave in the link in the description below. So thanks again for watching. So happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas and a happy New Year. So as always, don't forget to join me again next week, same time, same channel. So take care. Merry Christmas.